Would you like to be a king or queen in the Middle Ages? That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? But it wasn't quite like that. When you woke up, your room would be ready. Let's see how to become a king. Servants would prepare your towels and bring you hot water. Your room would be heated, and then it would be your turn to wake up. Someone would come and try to wake you up in fear. You could wake up whenever you wanted. The servants would bring you hot water and help you wash your hands, feet, face, eyes, everything, because you didn't have a shower or bathtub. When you started your day as a king in the Middle Ages, your first task was to pray. Whether you truly believed or just wanted to look good in church, prayer was a necessity, and you had to do it 34 times a day. What's more, each of your prayers had to be witnessed. Breakfast wasn't much to boast about. Some fruit, some cheese, maybe beer or wine. But then you'd gather with the council to discuss the country's important matters, decide where to go to war and who to attack. Some kings weren't so lucky. They were constantly on the battlefield. Many died at a very young age. One of the most important duties for kings who never left the palace was to oversee the training of the army. Archery practice, sword training, and war drills conducted regularly in training areas were closely monitored. The king was not only an observer, but also an authority figure who ensured discipline. Maintaining the morale of the soldiers, preserving order, and providing guidance when necessary were among the king's responsibilities. Some kings went hunting during certain periods. Hunting was done both to pass the time and to maintain physical endurance. It was also an important opportunity to demonstrate the leader's agility and readiness. These activities showed that a king's duties were not limited to sitting on the throne. Leadership required demonstrating oneself in every area. Some kings lived in extremely lavish palaces. Their portraits hung on the walls, and they regularly attended various entertainments. However, palace life was not just about luxury and glamour. Being king also meant presiding over major trials, deciding important judgments, and signing documents that would determine the fate of the country. The entertainment of the time was quite harsh by today's standards. Shows featuring slaves, prisoners, or criminals fighting each other were frequently held. These fights, though not as systematic as the gladiator games in Rome, served a similar purpose, a spectacle of power. The issue of captured women and concubines constituted another dimension of the palace system. While the king did not always make the selection directly, this task was often entrusted to the mothers, who held significant influence within the palace. When a messenger arrived at the palace one morning, it was rarely just a routine message. It was often a harbinger of danger. Was a new war on the horizon? Was one of the neighboring states preparing to attack? These questions would be discussed with advisors as they pored over maps and debated strategies. Critical decisions such as, should we go to war? Which territories should be targeted? Such critical decisions were shaped in these meetings. However, you were not always faced with military threats. At times, the palace also felt the pressure of the church. In some periods, religious authorities could attain a position more powerful than that of kings. When making decisions, you had to consider not only political, but also religious balances. If the decision to go to war was made, preparations would begin. Heavy armor would be donned, and the army would be mobilized. However, this armor did not always guarantee protection. War was often a path with no return. Grand feasts could be held at the palace, and diplomatic relations could be shaped at these tables. But the kingdom was not always governed by lavish feasts. Sometimes it was governed by strategic concessions. You might have to give up your own luxuries to please certain guests. At the end of the day, every signature you made as a king determined not only a decision, but sometimes your fate. That signature could make you a hero to the people, or it could lead you to the tip of a spear. The greatest challenge of the throne was continuity. An heir was essential for the kingdom's survival, and a single male heir was often deemed insufficient. This is why palaces frequently welcomed new concubines, wives, and queens. Monogamy was a rare occurrence in royal courts of that era. Multiple marriages and alliances were formed to ensure political stability. While some kings contented themselves with a single spouse or heir, it eventually became clear who would rise to prominence in the palace. Especially during evening meals, the future of the throne gradually took shape. A good king could mingle comfortably among his people. If there was trust and respect, the streets would be quiet. However, as in every era, the palace could be more dangerous than the outside world. Assassination, betrayal, poisoning, threats could come at any moment from anywhere. Someone who served loyally could one day be the one to bring about the end of the kingdom. The treasury of a kingdom was often filled with the spoils of war. However, when wars were not won, the treasury quickly emptied. An empty treasury brought not only economic collapse, but also a change in political power. At such times, the church could regain influence over the monarchy and even decide who would wear the crown. The private lives of kings were also often not shaped by their own will. Marriages were arranged to form political alliances. In some cases, it became necessary to marry individuals who were quite young. These marriages were more a matter of state interests than personal preference. Not every war ended in victory. Some cities were occupied, and enemy armies could advance with overwhelming superiority. This created an environment where even the king's own safety could not be guaranteed. Even within the palace, complete security could not be guaranteed. Privacy was virtually non-existent. The possibility of being eavesdropped on, spied on, or even assassinated was always present, even in the bathroom, the bathhouse, or during private conversations. Despite the thick walls of the palace, secrets often leaked out through a thin door. But what about queens? Being a queen was not as glamorous as one might think. First, you had to marry a king, and at a very young age, you were prepared for this life from childhood. Those ostentatious dresses, tight corsets that crushed your ribs, you had to suffer for beauty. There was no Botox, no Photoshop, no filters. There was only pain and mandatory beauty. Moreover, even if you were a king's wife, the likelihood of being his only wife was low. Other wives, concubines, favorite women, they were all your rivals. In those days, a mother might even kill her newborn baby with her own hands to protect it from a rival. Surviving in a palace where poison, daggers, and intrigue ran rampant was perhaps the greatest achievement. A servant could poison you for a few gold coins. You could be stabbed or strangled, and no one would question it. For the queen, the palace was often the source of the greatest danger. Your mother-in-law could act like a warlord and target your throne. She would form secret alliances and try to discredit you with slander. Even the king could confront you with serious accusations, which could cost you your life. You would always live in the shadow of powerful women in the palace. Your mother-in-law, the king's former wives, you could be banished from the palace with a single word. And this banishment often meant the end. Even if you had 10 daughters, a single son born to another woman could spell your doom. When your husband, the king, died, in many kingdoms, except England, the queen was not allowed to remain on the throne alone. So when the king died, either the queen would ascend the throne temporarily, or she would lose all decision-making power. The places where women were recognized as powerful figures were limited. This was mostly confined to England and the Scandinavian countries. Generally, the queen, who was the wife of a king going to war, had very little security. If your mother-in-law or the former queen kicked you out of the palace, you could end up living in a tiny room for years, far from a life of luxury. Generally, being a queen meant being a mother and preparing your children for the throne, even choosing between your children. Moreover, even if you had an heir, your position was never guaranteed until they ascended the throne. Additionally, being a king or queen did not mean ruling over a wealthy country. Perhaps you would be the ruler of a very poor, small kingdom. The people would be unhappy, and no matter what you did, they would boo you. Therefore, the throne, the position of king or queen, was never secure. And unfortunately, a plague could wipe out the entire population. The Black Death had wiped out 60% of Europe's known population. What other types of videos would you like us to make about the Middle Ages? Don't forget to leave a comment. See you in the next videos, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.